Hey there, woman beings. Just a quick announcement before the start of our episode. This holiday season, we are launching our very first charitable initiative, which is something we've actually been dreaming about for a long time. We've talked about the opportunity to give and empower and make the world a better place since before actually the conception of this podcast even existed. So this is super exciting that we have the opportunity to do this. Kellyanne is going to tell you all about it.
Yes, so we are partnering with a company called Ruby Cup, which is an incredible company that was founded in 2012. And they are the very first menstrual cup company to have a built-in buy one, gift one program. So no matter what you buy from them, you are always donating a menstrual cup to a woman in period poverty or in need in an impoverished nation or something of that sort, which is amazing because Ruby Cup's mission is to end period poverty. So we're very excited to partner with them.
Yes, that mission is also our mission. We love the way that Ruby Cup is trying to empower women. If you don't know, women in period poverty means that they wind up missing out on things like an education or getting to have a real steady job or all sorts of things because they don't have a way to manage their period. And that is a silly obstacle, we think. So we are partnering with Ruby Cup to match every donation that is made through our affiliate link until the end of the year up to $2,500. And so that means that by the end of the year, we will have donated, along with you, up to $5,000 worth of menstrual products, which is just incredible. That means that around 300 women will gain access to menstrual cup who didn't have access before. And that's going to change women's lives. And we are going to have links for that in our bios, in our stories, in our everywhere. You can find it to partner with us. You can either buy yourself a menstrual cup or buy a menstrual cup for someone you love. And your menstrual cup purchase will give an automatic donation from Ruby Cup and then also an automatic donation from us if you're using our affiliate link. If you do not menstruate or have no need for a menstrual cup, then you can also just donate a cup and not purchase one. And that will still be a match donation on our end. So you donating one cup is like donating 2 cups because we are giving all the cups away.
It's a lot of menstrual cups. And then final thing to just make sure you guys understand is that we're making absolutely no money from this. This is 100% going to support women in need. So with that being said, happy donating, happy menstruating, and happy holidays.
And we hope you enjoy this episode.
Hello there, woman beings, and welcome to another episode of the Woman Being Podcast. I'm here today with the miraculous Kelly.
Whoa, hello.
And the...
Okay.
I almost said
see how it is.
Dominatrix.
Dominatrix.
And the...
Effervescent.
And the effervescent Kellyanne.
Thanks, Kelly, my real friend that has a nice word to call me.
And I'm Emma. We are here today to talk about...
Emma with her foot in her mouth.
I didn't give you guys more than your name.
You absolutely did.
Anyways.
Angelic Emma. Thank you. You're welcome.
Stunning Emma.
Thank you. Feel free to shower me with all the compliments you want after we're done recording. I know you'll have more.
You got it.
Feel free to give me compliments on our Woman Being Instagram. It's Woman Being Podcast on Instagram. Or you can shower me with compliments on our YouTube, shower me with compliments on our TikTok, on all podcast platforms. That's where you can compliment me because I know you're all jonesing to do that. So there you go. All that to say, we are going to talk today about, drumroll please.
I don't want to.
I really did it. I'm so sorry.
The Way Down, the Cult of Gwen Shamblin, and God and Greed. I messed up the title. It's The Way Down, God, Greed, and the Cult of Gwen Shamblin.
There you go.
It is a docuseries that is out now on HBO Max, and we are going to talk about a powerful woman in religion and toxic messaging to women and to all people, really, but especially women, because this is Woman Being, and we like
Women. I'm like,
So let's dive right in. This is Woman Being,
where we explore thoughts and opinions.
And have the freedom to change our minds.
Without expectation or judgment.
We will hold a safe space and support each other
as we navigate together in the form of feminine.
Ladies.
Yeah.
Gwen Shamblin.
Yeah.
Shambles.
Is in shambles. The Remnant Fellowship. Also shambles. Have you guys ever heard of this person or this group or the Way Down Workshop?
Literally never once.
Never once.
I had never heard of the hair. I never heard of the weight loss techniques. This was all new to me. We just got off of a 3-hour binge of the whole docuseries.
So we're a little squirrely.
So you're getting our very raw, unfiltered reactions to this. And I knew nothing, and now I know everything.
Everything. Yeah. So for those of you that don't know, Gwen Shamblin is this woman who lived in Tennessee and created a church called the Remnant. And before that, she became very popular with her Christian faith-based diet program called the Way Down Workshop, but way spelled like weight. And the docuseries is The Way spelled like The Mandalorian, This is the Way. And just for context there. But she created this Christian diet program that became very popular, and then she decided to start a church that was based around what she saw to be the true church, which was like true teachings that she felt were not being received or distributed in other churches, right? So then this docuseries dives into a myriad of topics, like wide-ranging, like sort of pummels you with a lot of topics. It's 3 episodes that are each nearly an hour long, and it talks about the way that women and like gender hierarchy works in this church. It talks about divorce and sexual affairs, and talks about the treatment of children in this church, talks about the toxic ideas around weight in this church, and like essentially people like being totally like cut off from their families because they're so deeply involved in this church. And
church is a nice way of putting it, I feel like.
What would you call it?
I mean, it's a cult. There's no question.
She's going all guns blazing.
I mean, I feel I love to call cults. It's my favorite thing. But I feel like this docuseries, like, it's really not, I don't think, very ambiguous at all. Like, we did a series, or not a series, but an episode on the LulaRich series. And it's a little ambiguous. Like, I call it a cult because I just like calling things cults. But, you know, like, you could probably, like, talk your way in or out of it on either end.
Yeah.
This one, it just kind of is what it is. Like, it's just calling the kettle black. It's a cult.
Yeah. Yeah. I think.
And not, like, just like, oh, a cult is in, like, a group of people who think the same way, which is the technical definition. But, like, an abusive, controlling cult.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's what I really liked about the docuseries is they brought on several different specialists, but one who is an expert in cults, and he lays out the differences, right? And he says, like, there's your general cult, which is just everyone thinks the same, like Kelly mentioned, and then there is the cult that is brainwashing, that is harmful physically and mentally to those involved. And to me, because the root of her movement, if you will, is based on controlling how you look. And that control comes through God's divine intervention in your life. That is, to me, what makes it so cult-like. And then there's the hierarchy, too. Like, she clearly maps out at one point. She kind of ditches the Trinity, like says, we don't need that. It's about God. And then she's like...
Heresy.
Right.
So we're starting out with heresy. So that's usually a good indicator of cult.
Christian organizations would recognize that as heresy. But she says, you need someone to get you to God. And she maps out Jesus, your church leaders, your husband, your, like, and she lists all these people, and the very bottom of that hierarchy is children. And then that gets real dark real quick.
Well, yeah, here's the thing. There is, yes, like the maintenance of image, the heretical theology, etc. But like, there's also like the abuse of children, people being like excommunicated from their families and friends, like people struggling to be able to leave, people being threatened with like the removal of their children. Like there's actually like very manipulative forces like at hand that are like keeping people within the group and keeping people outside of the group, depending on whether you conform or don't conform. And so that to me is like the main indicator of cult in my worldview is like cults are very exclusive. They only allow certain people in. It's really hard to like communicate with people once they've been removed from the cult. Like that's kind of a big indicator.
On top of that, the idea of them having like this absolute truth plays into that a lot. Like you hear Gwen use the phrase true church a lot of times. And she's like, I have discovered the true church. I've unlocked the key to the true church. And so therefore she is the steward of that true church. Right. And if you go to any other church, they are a false church. Because they're not Gwen's church.
Yes. Right. And they claim to kind of provide and have access to all of the answers of life. Like if you want to truly live a happy life, if you want to be in a church as God intended, if you want to like, I don't know, get married, have children, be healthy and happy or whatever, like this is the place where you come because we have found, as Emma said, the key to life.
Well, and on top of that too, there's that absolute control. Like this one girl talks about how she asked her husband permission to go get a Starbucks. And his response was, well, do you want a Starbucks or do you want dinner? Or we had, like, apparently...
there's so many layers in that.
There's so many layers.
Like, between the weight control idea, but then also the like, familial hierarchy and the idea of the man as the head of the household and this, like, absolute control. Like, there's even, like, a segment in her, like, advanced series that Gwen Shamblin has for like her workshops that's about total obedience like that. Sorry, I just had to like peel back the onion a little bit. There's like so many things that go into that.
That kind of manifests in a woman being like, can I get Starbucks? And her husband like being the determinator of whether or not she can have a $5 drink.
Right. Well, and that's just the beginning, right? Yeah. Like other people, if they wanted to go on vacation, they had to get approval from their leader in the church.
Right.
Or if essentially there's a hierarchy all the way up and everyone's asking permission and accountable to other people and you can't really trust anyone. Like you couldn't go to your best friend and be like, hey, I'm really struggling in my marriage and her not report that, or a wife being advised after she works, a 9 to 10 hour day or whatever, going home and being exhausted and her husband always wanting sex. And instead of saying, no, I don't want to have sex, she's advised to have a couple glasses of wine and allow her husband to have his way. And she's like, well, to me, that sounds like rape. And I'm like, yes, queen, if you don't want it, you don't need it. And you can say, no, thank you. But she's encouraged to, go along with it. Like all that is very dangerous behavior because essentially you don't have autonomy.
Yeah, for sure. That was like hearing that woman's story specifically that you're referencing was definitely wild to me. Like just blatantly saying, yeah, you should probably just like booze yourself up a little bit so that you're willing and more subservient to your husband when he gets home. Like, what?
Yeah.
And I think there were a few things like that in the docuseries for me that felt like, I can't believe people are saying this so blatantly. Like, there's also a phone call that they have recorded of a woman speaking to Gwen about disciplining her child. And she talks about, like, how Gwen told her to, which... I guess we should put a warning on here that a lot of these topics might be triggering to you guys because we are talking about sexual assault and abuse and like abuse of children and things like that definitely can be triggering. So
and weight loss and weight control,
like body dysmorphia type of Thanks. So that is a standing trigger warning on that. But in this conversation, she literally says, I did what you said, and I took my son, I put him in his room, took everything out of his room, and left him in there for 3 days with just a Bible. And now he's obedient. And I'm like,
yes.
And Gwen was like, that's amazing. Like, that's so good that you did that.
Oh,
and
gosh.
it's like wild to hear that.
Yeah.
And what were some other like, what the heck moments for you guys?
Oh my gosh, pretty much the whole thing. I mean,
You're sitting there just like slack-jawed.
Again, we just watched this like about 15 minutes ago, so now it's like processing all of the shock.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think to me the abuse of children like really hits the hardest. I think I abhor rape, I abhor sexual assault, I abhor like differentials in power, etc. But like for me, the line really stops with like hurting children for, I don't know, like religious purpose. I don't think that's Jesus' heart at all. I don't think that's a good thing for humanity or for children. So I think that to me was just like completely shocking that like people would believe and be pressured into like harming their children for the sake of their like obedience. Like essentially they're kind of trying to create robots that like are, I don't know. And so, yeah, that to me is like horrifying.
Yeah.
Yep. Yeah, I agree. I think that's super true and fair. I think for me, I mean, the obsessive control of your weight as a direct reflection of your spirituality is pretty rough because essentially, like, she is associated your weight with your goodness and your sinfulness because you're quote-unquote obedient. And that's what they were trying to force these children into is absolute obedience and obedience for the sake of appearances as well. But this like control of your weight as a way to control your goodness and your spirituality, which I am all for losing weight. Like, yes, that like she was at first teaching like portion control and intuitive eating, and she has, or at least she went to school. I don't know if she completed her degree, but she went to school for nutrition. So she's somewhat qualified to talk about these things. But again, we get in this really weird space in the church where that and spirituality intersect. And she talks about, like, we just need to stop bowing down to the fridge. And I'm like, people's, body dysmorphia, weight problems, eating disorders, fill in the blank, or disordered eating, like, their relationship with food is way more complex than just not bowing down to the fridge. Like, that's actually not how it works. And I found what was interesting is they touch on this very quickly, but her relationship with food growing up and how her eyes were, quote unquote, always bigger than the stomachs, which kids isn't, because you're ravenous all the time because you're growing. But that, like, Great Depression mentality of you always finish what's on your plate. And I see similarities between her and the lady that was the founder of LulaRich, because I almost saw this, like, empowerment of, like, if people can do this, I can do this, and this, like, self-affirmation almost. But yeah, I mean, the rape, the abuse, the affairs, the control, the misuse of the gospel. It's pretty bad.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't even know if you could call it the gospel, honestly. Not to say that she didn't preach the gospel at any point in time, but at least what is depicted on screen is there's actually rarely a mention of Jesus.
Oh, barely.
I think there's one.
She got rid of him from the equation.
Well, when she draws the diagram,
that's the one
Jesus
time she talks about him. But, like, pretty much none of the preaching that it points to or whatever involves Jesus or, like, mentions salvation as a result of what he did on the cross. It's, like, all very much, like, you have to act a certain way, you have to be obedient, you have to
gain
like
salvation.
be pure to gain salvation. So it was very much not a gospel type of church.
Also, I think what was crazy is the divorce.
That was kind of
situation.
wild. Yeah, they sort of like surprise you in the middle of the docuseries that, oh, she's had a husband this whole time. And she like kind of divorces him and almost immediately gets engaged to this like nobody actor who's like very handsome, kind of just like arm candy pretty much.
Yeah.
Which I hate to say, that's a horrible thing to say about a human, but like she kind of just marries this arm candy trophy husband, and she's got this like whole family, like her husband and like kids and all this stuff that she just like kind of drops him.
Yeah.
And he's overweight, which is probably a huge piece of it. Like, I don't know how she justified it in her mind. Like, maybe to her, like, he wasn't following God, and so that gave her the proper excuse to...
Although he had a master's in divinity.
Yes. He is actually trained to teach the gospel and understands theology.
He probably had some concerns about some of her theological views.
That's what it seemed like.
Yeah.
It seemed like she started this church and he started to step back from the spotlight and be like, oh, I don't really feel comfortable standing behind this.
Yeah.
But it also, the docuseries said that he didn't want the divorce.
Yeah.
Right.
He
And
wanted to stay with her.
Yeah. Which I think is probably partially like his beliefs and thinking that they shouldn't get divorced in general. But it's, that was interesting too.
Well, and then the thing that was hardest or saddest for me was, okay, she gets divorced, and then she like goes with this other like rando. Like this guy's like not a religious guy. He has like an interesting background. He's
like a drifter. Like,
yeah,
he
he's
just
like,
goes
that's what it
from,
seems like.
He goes from like rich lady to rich lady to rich lady,
Yeah.
and then he just somehow lands this.
He's had some sugar mamas in his past, pretty much, and he's not religious. He's very much has a history with drugs and alcohol and all sorts of like.
I mean, he could
behavior.
have had a divine conversion.
And I'm not saying he didn't.
Away
and honestly, if he's
past.
For him to arrive as the co-leader of this church, he must have like either led himself to believe or actually experienced some sort of conversion. So I'm not saying that, but I'm saying he just suddenly steps in as this like hero, God-loving man.
Yeah. Who's now somehow qualified to co-run this massive movement.
Right.
With his lady.
What? His qualification he got from his acting classes in LA?
Yeah, I don't know.
From his country music videos? Like,
I mean, he just seems like someone who likes attention. He likes to be in the spotlight, and the church is a big enough community with cameras and, access to money and things like that. And so he
honestly, I
took
feel
the
like
opportunity.
The church, a lot of the evangelical church in general, in some ways, I think is sort of just like an ego rub for people who wanted to be famous but couldn't make it in the non-Christian world.
100% thank you for saying it.
I feel like we need to talk about that more. Because, like, we talk about celebrity culture within the church and stuff like that, but everyone's like, oh, we shouldn't have that. But no one actually talks about, like, the root of it. Like, church is kind of like and I can say this because, like, I wanted to, like, be a film person, but I didn't want to do it outside of, like, the church and, like, the covering of whatever. But, like, the church feels like an easy way to kind of, like...
Super easy.
Find resources, get connected to people...
The church is the worst at this. The church is like, yes, we will fund the missions trip, the ministry school, the film, the album, whatever. You fill in the blank, and it's because to them, they're furthering the message of the gospel. And so the church is an easy place to be like, I have this calling from God, but really it's like, I have a dream, and I have desires as a person. But they're like, we got you. Mm-hmm. So it's an easy place for someone like Joe to end up.
Yeah, well, I mean, and for someone like Gwen.
And for someone like Gwen.
Because she's someone who is not qualified, as far as I could tell, as a preacher or in ministry of any sort. Like, she was passionate and charismatic and able to get people on board with the vision that, quote unquote, God had given her. You know?
Oh, I just thought of something that was really disturbing. I just remembered. Her daughter's son dies suddenly as an infant.
Yes.
And the church has this kind of core belief that, like, God punishes bad behavior, right? Like, so this death is some sort of judgment, right? And that's horrible if you think, oh, like, this poor daughter is going to, like, harbor all this guilt. No, that's not what happens. They assume that some sort of promiscuity of some kind or some sort of bad...
Some sin has infiltrated
their church. And
Yeah.
they're like, it's not
us.
It's not us. So they start pointing at their leaders and calling them in. And I think they called them the strugglers.
Mm-hmm.
So they pull in like their struggling church leadership and they go, well, you must have caused this. And that to me was horrible. Like that you could blame someone else for the death of your child. Like just because of sin and judgment. And like just very backwards, messed up kind of views of the Bible and God and judgment and all those things. That was pretty disturbing.
Well, and something else, they touch on it a little bit, but they don't go into a lot of detail, is that you would be brought in for quote-unquote counseling, which an ex-member said was basically just mental abuse.
Yeah.
And this would happen pretty frequently if, and this is why you wouldn't confide in your best friend or whatever, because you'd get reported to leadership and leadership would bring you in. And it's like, I don't want to talk to anyone about anything because I don't want to go into this mental abuse situation. And that was pretty mind-boggling. I wish they would say more about what that looked like and what that entailed. But it sounded pretty dark.
Yeah, there was like a tattletale culture where it was like, well, if you say anything that's against the church or anything that I might perceive as like sinful, I'm going to go tell the church leaders about it. And it doesn't matter if they're your best friend or your husband or whatever. Like anything that you do that they perceive as contrary is reported and then you're reprimanded.
Yeah.
Which is wild. But another thing that I thought was particularly salacious
Good word.
was a girl who went under the fake name of Sarah, right? She was part of the church with her husband and wanted to divorce her husband. And
for good reason. He was like abusive and
I can't
having
remember.
affairs
Is
or
that what
something
it
like
was?
that. He was there's some sort of like adultery happening or something, but she wasn't allowed to divorce him.
Yes, she was not allowed to divorce him. And so she essentially seduces Gwen Shamblin's son, which was like, what? So Gwen Shamblin's son, Michael Shamblin, is like this depressed, like wannabe musician who like was like in and out of the spotlight, but like wasn't as prized as her daughter was. And he like had a like underground secret of like drinking and being like adulterous essentially. So she like took advantage of that and slept with him. And then although I don't know if they explicitly say that she slept with him, but it's heavily implied.
It's heavily implied, and it's not necessarily for sure that like she just seduces him, like that. There's not like a mutual.
She built a relationship.
Like it seems
as though she took advantage of him, and he was doing something that he just always does.
Yeah. So I mean, but I'm not saying that
cheat on his wife.
She got the dirt though.
Yeah,
she got the dirty dirt.
So when she goes to divorce her husband, then like the church and its lawyers are trying to gain custody of her children, and so she texts Michael and says, "You get your mom's lawyers to drop the case, or everything comes out."
Yeah, and I was like, this girl blackmailed him.
She sure
like,
did.
No, obviously, like, it seems to me like she was a woman who was desperate, who took advantage of a situation that was already desperate in a way to help her and her children to get out of it.
Which is, like, props to you, honestly.
Is fair, yeah. But, like,
she
like, also did take advantage of these people.
Sure did.
And blackmailed them.
She's like, I did what I had to do. Which, I mean, I really respect that in a lot of ways. Like, I mean, no, it's not good to blackmail people, or take advantage of other people. But, like, I feel like as a mom, trying to get your kids out of a very tenuous... abusive situation. Like, I mean...
Well, and she'd seen it play out several times before. So she knew how it went. So she knew what she needed to do. And if it was going to go one way, unless she did something really extreme. And I'm like, okay.
You did
not the best way, but it's a way.
But, like, I mean, her future is so different, though, from other women who were interviewed. And, like, she's got an abusive, adulterous husband who, you know, like, wants to have sex with her. She doesn't want to have sex with him. And she keeps getting in arguments with him. And he's kind of, like, overriding her as, you know, the authority figure in the relationship and being like, well, if you talk to me like that, I'm going to tell the pastor.
Yeah.
And me, you know, and like talking to the pastor kind of implies the sort of counseling, mental torture kind of things we talked about. And there, it comes to a point where she's like, I don't even want him to come home. And the pastor's involved and he's
You're
like,
talking about a different woman now, right?
yes.
Okay.
Yeah. I think I said that. But yeah, it's similar to this. It's a different story from this other woman who kind of had a different fate because she didn't necessarily like
Do something extreme.
Yeah. And her fate was like her husband is like doing all this stuff. She's angry at him, doesn't even want him to come home and be in her home, which is fair. And the pastor calls her and says, oh, like, will you please let him back in? He's really repentant. And, like, will you please just do this favor for me?
Well, it wasn't Pastor Gwen who said that. It was one of the
I
leaders.
didn't say Pastor Gwen. I just said one of the pastors.
Oh,
He was one
I'm
of
not sure
the,
they
like,
called them pastors.
leaders.
Oh, leader. Okay,
Yeah,
I'm sorry.
yeah,
Leader.
whatever.
I don't know if they called Gwen a pastor.
I don't know.
She called herself a leader
Yeah.
in her deposition.
Sure.
Yeah.
So it sounds like maybe
No,
no
there
one's
weren't
called
pastors.
pastor.
I don't know. Point being, you
Yeah.
kind of either choose like a life of submission and manipulation or like you do whatever you can to kind of get out.
Right.
And this
Yeah.
other woman kind of was like manipulated with the threat of her children, her livelihood, like her well-being to like continue to be married to this like horrible man. And then that also brings up like they're just allowing this like abusive misconduct to persist in the men in the church and not and then being upset at the women for like saying, hey, that's not cool.
Yeah.
And they're calling that like rebellion.
Lack of obedience.
Yeah, lack of obedience. So it's like,
Yeah.
it's a really horrid situation. So I guess all that to say is I don't necessarily blame her for being an opportunist.
Yeah.
I mean, that's true. She like saw a weakness and she went for it, and no one else featured, at least in the documentary, went for that weakness. And I'm kind of like, yeah, Michael's a weak link. You got to take care of that kid if you want to, you know, keep this going. But.
Yeah. There is a lot. There is a lot. And actually, one thing that is really fascinating to me, which I personally never heard of this concept until I came out here to Reading. The idea of like a Christian diet program or like weight loss being even like a conversation in the church. I've never seen that until probably, I guess like Benny Johnson at Bethel has some stuff around that. And like I heard people talk about that and I was like, what? So I'm curious what you guys' experience has been like with Christian weight loss programs or like the way that the church talks about weight.
I mean, I wouldn't say that I like heard like growing up from the pulpit like stances about weight. It was more like your body's the temple, take care of it, like wink wink. But my mom, I think she'd be okay with me sharing this, but she's kind of like always kind of struggled with her weight, and so she's, you know, done the diets, tried different things. And so I felt pretty exposed to it through her. I felt like this was prominent in the female side of the congregation, even to the point that one of our church members growing up wrote a book called The Eden Diet. And it's essentially the exact same thing. It's portion control. It's you can eat what you want, but, you know, have self-control. God means for you to thrive, all those things, blah, blah, blah. And all the women in our church bought that book. I'm grateful, though, that it wasn't spiritualized growing up, because I think that could be really damaging, especially to young women. But it was definitely an ongoing conversation. When I moved out here to Reading, there is the Benny Johnson's Healthy and Free, and I think she has another book about it. And that's, like, talked about a lot, and I have never been someone who's struggled with weight until, you know, now as, like, a mid-20s young person. And I wouldn't say I struggle with my weight. I just have different, like
a different body than you had at 12.
Yeah, I just have a different body now. I have a woman's body and it's different. It holds more fat, like whoop-de-doo. But it's really damaging. Like when the church associates your goodness with weight loss, it's not okay. Like if the body is the temple, it's my job to take care of it. And however my body chooses to take up space is the way it will take up space. But as long as I am, doing the things it needs, that's kind of, to me, where it stops.
Yeah. Actually, now that we're talking about it, I hadn't really thought about this until like just now. I didn't necessarily really grow up with much of a theology around like weight loss in my church, because actually my pastor, like the head pastor of my church, was obese, and so he understandably didn't necessarily talk about that subject very often. But I think in my home I grew up with kind of the idea that like you really have to sort of take care of yourself. But I don't know if it was ever spiritualized either. To me, I was always just skinny and there was nothing I could do about it. I could eat as much as I wanted and had a fast metabolism and honestly could never get enough food. I was always so hungry because I was growing and I was tall and lean and all those things. So, but yeah, I actually just remembered that.
Yeah.
My pastor was overweight. And so I feel like there were like kind of chatterings about him kind of behind his back though. Like, and that he really needed to get a hold of it and stuff like that. But it was more out of like the not sentimental. It was more out of the sentiment of like, I want him to be healthy and not die and have a stroke like at, 52. And less of like he doesn't really love God if he's fat,
Yeah, totally. I mean, there isn't like a lot of empathy in religious circles around weight. It's like especially with women, like it's like if you lose weight and are healthy or whatever, then it's like good on you. But I feel like there is like if you're not, like there is like that chattering kind of behind your back and it's hard. And I mean, I remember like the women in the Bible study in my church would like all do like 3-day fasts together and stuff. And it would be like, a quote unquote spiritual practice, but there's also like, and you're probably going to lose some weight. Like there was like a little bit of that layer of like, you're probably going to lose some weight. And I'm like, what? Like,
fasting
and
is a horrible way to lose weight.
I would get so stressed out. Like anytime my mom like went on a 3-day fast, because in my mind, like as a child, I'm like, you're not going to eat, so you're going to die. Like, what do you mean you're going to just not eat food? Like, I mean, she would like drink chicken broth, but.
So then are you guys saying that you think that like fasting as a practice is bad?
I think it depends on where it comes from. I think it can be good, but I think it can be very, very destructive. I think it needs to be done in a very educated, careful way.
I know that some people fast for even health reasons. That's not even religious. So I'm not saying that fasting as a practice is unequivocally bad. But I would say to tread carefully.
Should probably be informed by a medical professional as
well. Right. Like I was
you.
permitted to fast as a 12-year-old. I don't think that's okay.
Yeah.
I don't think children should be allowed to not eat. I think there's way too many eating disorders and other issues out there when it comes to food that, So I have mixed feelings. I think, my advice around fasting is tread carefully, not that it's bad.
Gotcha. It's like very eye-opening to me to like hear you guys talk about that because I've had pretty much only like positive experiences around fasting as a thing and like never thought of it in a negative way at all. So like hearing you guys talk about it, it's like sort of like giving me whiplash.
Yeah.
But
because it is kind of known as sort of a sacred like religious practice. Like there's, it's people take it very seriously.
Yeah. I mean, I've fasted and had like found it very beneficial. But never has it ever like crossed my mind or have I heard people say like, oh, you might lose weight if you fast. Like that wasn't ever a thought. It was like, I'm taking like, I mean, the mentality I'd always been taught was like, you take the time that you would have spent eating and like spend that with God, essentially. Spend that time meditating, spend that time praying, whatever. And so then the thought that, like, there would be other goals is, like,
Yeah. Which I
wild to me.
think is also the traditional sentiment.
Yeah.
But when I observed it being practiced, it was just, I'm not eating and going about my normal life.
Mm-hmm.
And, like, I'm more spiritual because of it, quote unquote. But I didn't see that devotion to, I'm attempting to spend more time with God by omitting something from my day.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's fascinating. And I mean, what we see in The Way Down is this idea of using fasting as that tool to lose weight faster, right? They encourage women to abstain from eating in order to lose weight faster, in order to starve themselves. And then, I forgot about this one. The fact that there's one interview where Gwen Shamblin compares them abstaining from eating to people in prison camps being starved and says, well, they lost weight.
Yes.
And it
yes,
worked
they
for
did,
them.
Gwen.
I'm like, I don't think people in prison camps were looking to lose weight. Like, that was not the goal.
Well, and, like, she's even asked in that interview, like, do you realize how offensive that could be, come across? And she was basically like, she kind of got quiet. She's like, well, I've been saying this for 13 years. Like, the idea that, like, well, no one's been offended yet is, like, literally her justification for using it, which that to me just shows how this is like a homegrown woman from Tennessee. She, like, has not traveled a ton. She has stayed around people that think the same as her, that look the same as her. But it's like, oh, you're in that small town Southern mentality, of like, oh, well, like, no one's told me any differently, therefore it must be okay, or it must be true, or there's no, like, challenging her status quo.
Yeah. I mean, I feel like, though, it showed me a little bit of, like, how deluded she really is, sort of how into her bubble she is. They even talk about, like, the remnant bubble, sort of. I don't remember if they call
The Brentwood bubble.
The Brentwood bubble.
Yeah.
The Brentwood bubble, which is the town that Remnant is in, which, if you're from the South, you're probably familiar with Brentwood because it's, like, this very well-to-do area in Tennessee. But, yeah, she is sort of in this bubble and not really interacting with other people. And she's interacting only with people that are, like, affirming her. But it actually made me think instantly of the governor of New York who was
Cuomo.
who just resigned. Cuomo. Andrew Cuomo had a very similar sentiment as he was questioned about the women that he sexually assaulted and was like, well, this is just, like, the way I've kind of always operated. And it's like, that doesn't actually make that okay. That doesn't make it fine. That just means no one stood up to you yet.
Yeah. Well, and part of me even thinks, like, not to get too biblical, but this makes me think of in Corinthians.
Don't look at me. I don't even know what you're going to say.
the verses.
I'm expecting you to just know. Where it's like, I do not permit women to teach. But it's essentially because those women have not had the opportunity to learn. Therefore, he's saying, please become a student, learn, and then once you're educated, you can teach. But this woman comes from a Baptist background where women cannot teach or speak really at all.
Church of Christ.
Sorry, Church of Christ. Sorry, wrong one. And so to me, I'm wondering if it's just like a high that she's even getting to speak and getting this attention and this platform. And she's like, oh my gosh, I'm being seen. And part of me wonders if that plays into this dynamic we see play out.
Yeah. I mean, do you feel like that sort of understanding all those things cultivated, like, an empathy for you for her?
Surprisingly, I actually don't feel empathy for this woman. And I think it's because of all the power and the money and the control that she set up. It's like, oh, damn, like, you actually really ruined some people's lives. Like, like, in my opinion, potentially more than LulaRich, because that's a business, right? Yes, it has religious influences and all that, but this is like religion. This is spirituality. This is people's hearts. And you're ruining their lives by essentially telling themselves, allow your husband to rape you.
Yeah.
Like, that is that is different to me. And also, like, she is cultivating eating disorders and disordered eating. Like, women and men feel like their spiritual success is based on their ability to lose weight. And there's a lot of medical reasons that you could possibly be gaining weight, or also just your genetics. Like, some people just get, like, some rougher genes. And that doesn't devalue you.
I feel like we also don't give, like, our current socioeconomic state in America much credit when it comes to, like, obesity rates and things like that. Like, it is hard to access good quality, affordable, non-processed food. Like,
it's true.
It's like the average person doesn't necessarily have access to, like, stuff that's not, like, loaded with unhealthy, I don't know, chemicals, and I shouldn't say chemicals, but, like, high fructose corn syrup and other, like, weight causing sort of ingredients.
Yeah.
So I feel like there's layers to it, and that we sort of live in a place where it's hard to access foods that don't create unhealthy, like, brain addictions.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I just feel like that needs to be said as well.
No, it's fair.
Like, genetics play a role, but, like, this phenomenon is not 100 years old even, you know? So it does speak into the state of our country as far as access goes, as far as, like, the quality of the food that we're eating goes. And, I mean, it's multi-layered, but anyways, I don't know if that's important, but.
I mean, I think with access, the thing is if you look at, like, the history of food, there was, like, the processed food craze as there started to be the technology to create more processed foods and to, like, have packaged foods and things like that. And it became, like, a staple of middle-class society. And now I feel like there's a bit of a reversal on that, where middle-class to upper middle-class society is moving more towards, like, the organic and the, like,
healthy eating.
And I think we have access to those things, but there's definitely, like, when you get into lower middle class and, like, a low income people who are, like, at or below the poverty line, there's food deserts where they don't have access to fruits and vegetables.
Right.
They don't have access to, like, basic staple things. They have access to, like, fast food and to, like, bodegas or convenience stores that essentially stock junk food.
Yeah.
And that's definitely an issue.
And I guess the people of Brentwood, in theory, ought to be able,
definitely have access
they should
to
be able to afford
food.
the things. But I mean, like, there is, like, a cultural this is maybe a whole episode topic that we can go into. It's, like, the food in America, and all the documentaries galore about this, but, like, the people in America, even though the middle class is now moving towards more organic, healthy eating, there are still, like, habits that have been put in place for the last 30, 40,
there's a lot
50
of, like,
years.
re-educating that I feel like has been happening and needs to happen.
Right. So if you've been eating, like, Hamburger Helper your whole life, and now you're an adult and you have kids and whatever, like, you still eat those things that you learned to make and whatever. And, you know, it does affect, like, your metabolism and your brain chemistry and your hormones and all those things, which do play into weight gain. So that's more complex. Again, that's a whole can of worms that we can go into. But
one thing that's actually really fascinating is that I know, Kellyanne, you've brought up LulaRich a couple times now, which if you guys are not familiar with LulaRich, you should listen to our episode all about it on the docuseries called LulaRich. But there's a ton of parallels between that story and this story. In, like, on the surface level, both things have been called cults. Both things are run by these powerful, blonde, conservative women, religiously conservative women who are, like, powerhouses. There's a lot of weight things that come in, lots of control over people's marriages, control over people's incomes, and things like that are like, ooh, this is a lot. But one of the things that actually I think gave me a bit of empathy for Gwen was seeing the way that she ordered her church when it came to gender. So what they lay out is that there's like Gwen is like the leader of this church, and she has these men who are like elders or leaders that all come underneath her. And they like are the ones that lead the church. And then also she preaches a message of subservience to a husband in a marriage. And that was really fascinating to me, considering what a like powerful woman she is. She seems so independent. She seems so powerful, and like she would be preaching a message of empowering women. But instead, she still falls into the gender hierarchies that are taught in conservative Christian circles. And that to me, I was like, oh, you're like, that is similar to the LulaRich thing. But the fact that this is like solely in the church gave me more empathy for her, because I've seen the same things. Whereas I have not been part of like an MLM and like had messages like that brought to me through an MLM, but I have had messages brought to me through the church that are like that. And it was like, oh, you're using what you know. And like, yes, you, in some ways you're using what you know to increase your power, and somehow are like jumping through loopholes or like she's
You're
the
exempt
exception.
from it,
Yeah,
yeah.
she's the exception to the rule, because like she also allows herself to have a divorce and then to get remarried, but like that doesn't matter, but then like tells women that they can't get divorced later on because that's not what God wants. So it's like, that was fascinating to me, but like to see that there's still such a hierarchy of gender and putting man at the top, even in a woman-run church, was like, it felt a little bit like a mind trip to me. Like, how does that work?
Yeah, I think the thing that stood out to me with her that I can empathize with, in the sense of like, I've experienced this, and so I can understand why she would sort of react the way that she did, which is she created this very successful ministry, and she wrote this book that in theory actually helped lots and lots of women, like, and men. There were some men that were in her program as well, but like she sort of like, she didn't realize this, but in her mind she capitalized on intuitive eating and portion control, and like sent out a message to women. So that, and like, there's lots of like little testimonies that you see throughout the docuseries of women who have lost like hundreds of pounds and like are just free from health issues and other medications that they were on and things like that. And so you kind of see her and this this goal that she had and how it was successful, but then you sort of see that it kind of poisons her mind a little bit. Like she stops seeing herself as a human and starts seeing herself as something beyond like a normal person, which and gives herself permission to kind of like take control and like use that power to influence lots of people. And I think that to me, I can empathize with it in the sense that as someone who grew up in the Christian church, and you kind of, testimonies are sort of your lifeblood. Like you hear testimony, you're like, ooh, that one thing is working, right? And so you assume that, oh, this is good. You know, like even in my work today, you know, like you hear, oh, look at all these positive reviews about this product that we're trying to sell. This is a good thing. We're making a good thing that is good for humanity. But if you're not looking at yourself and the work that you do critically, you're going to miss the places where, oh, I'm actually, you know, causing women to feel shame and they're developing eating disorders. Or, oh, I'm, you know, like creating a product and it's unsustainable in these areas. Or, oh, like I have built up this influence and so many people say it's so great, but like, you know, it's a toxic work environment or whatever. Like there's always kind of like a dark underbelly, I've noticed, to like pretty much any sort of religious or corporate organization. And losing sight of yourself as human and fallible and able to make mistakes, I think is where it gets really dangerous. But so I empathize with her in the sense that I can see how she got where she got. And I know how it feels to believe and to see evidence that what you're doing is right and a good. But there's that little piece of it is like you have to have a self-critical mindset.
Yeah. You have to be willing to be like self-reflective.
Yeah.
And to pivot and be humble.
Be told you're wrong.
And dig, honestly, for wrong answers. Because, like, I think people in influence are used to not hearing that they do anything wrong. Not because they're, like, exerting unnecessary power over others, but because others in general are not going to bring up your flaws to you. They're just not. So, like, you really have to dig. Like, if you really want to know how to self-improve, like, what am I doing wrong? Like, in what ways have I hurt people? Like, in what ways can we make this better? And if you don't have that attitude, like, you're not going to really hear about it or believe that it's true until it's a cult.
Well, and really leaning into the pain of that, right?
Yes.
Like, knowing, like, hey, I tried to help women, and I did help women, but also I hurt some women. Like, that hurts. Like, that hurts really bad. And being willing to sit with that and do something to change it.
Right.
You can't undo it, but you can change your actions for the future.
Because I think nobody wants to create something that is harmful, right? Like, I mean, there's a few psychopaths out there, but, like, in general, I think people, when they create something, when they garner influence, when they whatever, it's somewhere in their mind, it's for the purpose of, like, a good cause, right? In Gwen's case, she's trying to preserve a remnant of the church that can actually go to heaven, because she doesn't believe that people are she believes that most people are damned. So so she's doing it, like, she believes she's received this revelation from God and must steward it to the point of, saving as many souls as possible or something like that. So, like, the core intention behind that, like, has, I don't want to say good, but it has a positive purpose, but, like, she's also not seeing her own greed and power struggle and dominance and whatever else that's manifesting in the midst of this sort of, like, dream that or calling that she feels like she has.
Right.
So in that way, I can understand, as an ambitious person who wants to influence people, who wants to be a leader, who wants to whatever, it's like, it actually comes with, like, a very, very heavy burden. And if you're not feeling the weight of that, like, it gets really dangerous really fast.
For sure. I think, she loses sight of her own humanity, and in that also loses sight of the humanity around her, which is when it's like, oh, you aren't allowed to have anxiety or depression or suicidal thoughts or even grieve for the loss of a child. Yeah. Or now her daughter, who has lost her spouse and her mom and her stepfather, and now she's leading this movement by herself, essentially. Like, she lost some of the people that were probably closest to her in her circle. And 3 weeks later, she's up on that microphone looking, like, smiling and looking as happy as she can be. And it's like, oh, damn. Like, they're not in touch with the human side of who they are.
Yeah, for sure. Which, I mean, if you are somehow listening to this and you haven't watched the series yet, you're probably very confused at this point. But that was a big spoiler, is that they die at the end.
She did.
They died earlier this year.
They being
Gwen Shamblin and her husband, Joe Lara, and a couple of the other leaders in the church, along with her daughter's husband.
Was Michael in that? No. Mm-hmm. Okay.
And so now her daughter has taken up the throne of the Remnant Church. And that was like, if you didn't know that they were already dead, then that would have been like, what? In the docuseries? I don't know if you guys knew. I knew that she was dead already.
I didn't, no.
And so...
For some reason, I, like, expected it. I don't know why.
Yeah, well, because they, like, tease you at the very beginning with this, like, plane crash story, and then don't bring it up at all until the very end.
I didn't expect it. I was like, how is this woman allowed to still carry on doing what she's doing when all this is happening? Like, so when she died, I was like, oh, that makes a lot more sense.
Yeah.
Yeah. But one thing that I'm actually curious about is looking at the Gwen Shamblin empire and how... it was built with this weight loss program that is obviously, like, targeted at and fueled by women. And also looking at, like, LulaRich, another empire targeted at and fueled by women. Why do you guys think it is that women are the, like, lifeblood of these things?
I feel like it has biblical roots, and it's that women can teach women, but women can't teach men. And that's why the founder of LulaRich had her husband as the active CEO or vice or president or whatever. Gwen had this team of men above her, in theory, and underneath her. Like, I think for some reason, though, we as women, I mean, not for some reason, obviously as women, we're attracted to other female leaders. Like, we're like, well, she did it, I can do it. And there's a safety with that. There's a trust with that. Yeah, those are my initial thoughts.
I wonder, this is a theory, again, surprise question, so.
Again?
Not again. Surprise question, so I don't know. This is me processing as I say it. But I think that in our culture, especially like good Christian culture, there is a willingness to be subservient, to trust what someone else is saying, to not challenge authority. And when a woman has taken a leadership role and there's that sort of trust there, it's like, well, she's a woman, so she gets it. Maybe we forget to like stand up for ourselves. And so I think women are very resilient in the fact that we put up with a lot. Like, men, if you don't know what we put up with, like, just trust us. We put up with a lot.
Just listen to our podcast.
And I think men are like largely unaware, honestly, of like the types of stuff that we just like let go over our heads just or we brush off our shoulders or whatever. Like, we just keep moving forward. And so I think on one hand, props to us. On the other hand, I think we can tend to be a little bit more accommodating than we ought to be when it comes to abusive leadership.
That's fair. Very fair.
And that combined with having a trust for a female leader that you wouldn't necessarily feel for a man can create sort of this like snowball effect. And then the men get involved and they take their rightful, quote, place as the leaders, and then things get real hairy.
Yeah. Hairy because men are hairier than women, right?
Yes. That's what I meant.
They're hairy and gross.
Yes. Because we were all perfectly shaved.
Yes.
If we even had hair to shave.
Only on the tops of our heads and in our eyebrows. And our eyelashes that we bat at men to seduce them.
Yes.
Anyways.
That's a theory. I don't know if that's just the first thing that came to mind as a possible answer to your question.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think all of that very well may be the case. And I think on top of that, there's the female market is like has a ton of potential, you know, like women have a lot of like sway, I think. And whether like as women have historically been like the keepers of the household, as they've historically been sort of the shepherds of the children, which the Remnant Church had a huge emphasis on children. They
very Handmaid's Tale-esque, actually.
Yeah, it was weird.
I think that they like they see that like, oh, if they can get the women in, then they also get the children. So you get like a
next generation
multi-pack, you know, of influence. And maybe the husband will come along and maybe he won't. But you've still gotten more than you would have otherwise. Because that sort of is like a full package. And I think that that's one thing. And then also I think similar to what you guys are saying, like I think women are eager to have influence because for so long that has not been accessible. And so when access to influence is promised, access to success, whether that looks like making money through an MLM or it looks like achieving a body image that is idolized in our culture, you're told you can have this and therefore be more successful, be more influential. Like I think women flock to that because it's been hard to gain.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I don't know. It's definitely something, because it's like what do you say? Like, women are just gullible, the end?
No, that's not what I'm saying at all.
No, I'm not saying that's what you're saying.
Yeah.
I'm just saying, like, I don't think that's the answer.
Well, and okay, like we can't also look at these two organizations in a vacuum either, right? Like there's plenty of like male-led cults and harmful organizations. I mean,
yeah.
we're talking about like Mark Driscoll, Ravi Zacharias. Like there's plenty of like abuse and misuse of power in the male realm. So I don't think it's fair to just like, to kind of like assume that women have like a weakness toward being manipulated because like very clearly there's definitely men led and I don't know initiated things that that are equally if not more harmful like war. So but like I think when it comes to like there are kind of like these women like groups that sort of like grow.
Yeah.
And then before you know it, they're...
Yeah, because word spreads. Women talk.
That's
and
the
if
thing.
You
it
have
feels
a great...
like quite almost crazed
Yeah.
in the way that it happens. Like it spreads like wildfire.
Totally. Well, because like if I have a great experience, I'm going to tell you about it and you're going to be curious about it. And if you have a great experience, you're going to tell your friends about it. And meanwhile, I'm telling all of my friends about it. And all of a sudden, like you have this group of women that are all excited and eager because of like a handful of good experiences, or like we tend to trust each other. And it's like, well, if you had a good experience, I will probably have a good experience too. And I mean, I feel like that's more like the generation before us. I think our generation's a little more like curious and hesitant overall, which I think is a good thing. But yeah, it's interesting because also these two movements started around the same time, right? LulaRich a little bit later than whatever
the way down.
The way down. But like they're kind of around the same era, and you see
90s, early 2000s.
Yeah. Well, I think the way down started a little bit like early 90s.
Might have been 80 something,
like late 80s. But like you see these like similar evolutions, these movements take off, all these women are around it, and then it's like, oh, but we're gonna be good Christians and bring in the men for leadership. And I'm like, bleh.
Maybe you had a good thing going before they came along.
I don't know.
So really it was the men.
The men poisoned the movements.
No,
I don't think
it's
so.
definitely interesting.
It was everyone. Yeah. Everyone ruined it.
If it was even good from the start.
True. Which is interesting. Because I saw like a few pieces of like, yeah, you're trying to help people. I see that. Could be harmful, but you know, what she was seeing was good outcomes, and people were praising her for it. And she's like, well, if it's helping all these people, I need to get to all these other people to help them too. And then it gets crazy. Yeah.
Which is also harmful as like a mentality in general, because that's a very like, what's the word? It's like sanitary, because it assumes that what works with one person or one type of person will work with every other.
Yeah, if it's good for you, it's good for me.
It doesn't consider like all sorts of other factors. Yeah. Like when it comes, if you use the weight loss as the example, it's not considering like your racial or ethnic background. It's not considering the types of food that you grew up eating and what type of food your body's accustomed to. It's not taking into account your health history and like all these things. And I think about that as well with like evangelism and like missionary work for like Christians practice, like is this idea that like, we are going to take this formula and we're going to apply all across all cultures and like all different people groups. And it's like, oh, maybe that actually doesn't work. Maybe like you don't need to make them assimilate to you. It's that idea of like assimilation that I think is really harmful. And it's something that we in in the United States, like, love assimilation. So it's
The good old melting pot.
yeah, the melting pot that, like, actually you need to, like, melt together and be one.
We're all melted together
Yes.
into one mush.
When really, I think actually it was in our episode that we did with Carissa on Asian American hate crimes. She talked about, which is, you should give that episode a listen, about how really we should be like a salad. Was that the analogy we
Yes,
used?
like a Cobb
Like,
salad.
be like a salad. You are individual parts that all work well together instead of a melting pot that is all blended into one uniform thing. Because diversity is actually what's going to make this dish delicious. We want to be a salad.
Yeah.
We're all food. Meant to be
very
eaten.
dark. Anyways, yeah. There's like a million different paths we could go down on the different toxic teachings that were in Gwen Shamblin's empire, if you will, and that they brought up in this docuseries. And I guess I would say I would recommend just watching it and diving into the craziness. But would you guys recommend this docuseries?
Oh my gosh, absolutely. Like, if you like cults or if you like religion, like, this is for you. Or if you like powerful women. Or if you like weird men. All those things are prerequisites to enjoying this. So.
If you didn't already listen to this docuseries prior to listening to this episode, yes, would highly recommend. And the best part is that there's more episodes coming out next year.
Yeah, I think some point in 2022 they're going to release like a part 2.
Which it definitely
Amazing.
left some like open-ended questions
There's
in
some
regards to like
questions, for
what is the investigation of this plane crash uncovered?
Yeah.
What's going to happen to some of the characters that you meet throughout? And I call them characters; they're actual humans. But like, what's their fate? Do we know more? So I'm just like very curious. Oh, and one other plug, directed by a woman. So.
Yes, directed by a woman. That's very important to bring up. This is a female-led film. Also executive produced by Chrissy Teigen.
Chrissy.
Depending on what you think of her,
Okay, girl.
that could sway your opinion either way.
Okay.
But yeah, that's pretty cool, is that it's a woman-led film.
Yeah.
But anyways, give it a watch. And maybe if we might do a follow-up when the new half comes out.
Yeah.
I don't know. Throwing it out there, let us know, actually, on our Instagram or YouTube or TikTok or whatever. If you want us to do a part 2 when the part 2 comes out, if you want us to review that as well. Because if you ask, you will receive, woman beings. We are here for you. And so, yeah, all that to say, you can follow us at Woman Being Podcast on Instagram and TikTok. And you can also listen to us on all major podcasting platforms.
It's true, it's true.
Apple Podcasts,
No cap.
Spotify, Amazon, Audible, Stitcher, etc. And we would love, whatever your preferred podcasting platform is, if you would give us a review. We really appreciate it. We know that that's like a big ask and it feels a bit laborious to do, but I promise it just takes a few seconds and it's super helpful to us and to let other people know about the podcast and to like get the word out there. So if you're listening and you enjoy it, we would really appreciate it if you'd leave us a little review. But all that to say, thank you for talking with me today, ladies.
You're so welcome.
Thank you, Emma.
We had such a great time.
This was a good one.
A little gap sesh, it feels like.
I love a good docuseries about cults.
Yeah.
Same.
Love toxic Christian teachings. And
I don't know if you could call this Christian.
it is Christian derived.
Yes.
Christian adjacent.
Christian-ish.
It's
Yeah.
Christianish.
Yeah.
It's like one step removed Christian.
Yeah, for sure. We'll see you guys next time on the Woman Being Podcast. See you next time.
Bye.
Bye.